Hey everyone, Lauren here. Today I'm going to show you how to paint your sunrise backdrop. Before you get started, make sure to reference your chosen scenario so that you know where to place your sun, as you can see here, and your largest balloon. The most important thing with this window is that it's a nice and even ombre between colors. So the key to do that is blend, blend, blend. Let's get started. The first step in this process is to make sure that you clean up your backdrops from Christmas. So you'll want to sand them and then patch any holes and then prime them with cotton blossom. So as you see here, that has already been done. You also want to make sure to lay out a drop cloth, which we're sending you. And then to get started, you'll want to print out your inspiration photo, which is in the deck. And then you'll need your 3 paint colors and a tray and paintbrush and paint roller for each. The colors that you'll be getting started with are Infatuation, Passion Fruit Punch, and Joyful Orange. And so I'm going to take the roller with the Infatuation first. It's the pinkest color. And then this is going to go towards the top of your backdrop. What we're going to do is break it up into thirds. And so the objective here is to just get a lot of color on the top. Feel free to also use a step stool at this point if you can't reach the top. Something else you can do if you need to is mark off on the side with some tape. You can mark your thirds. I'm just going to estimate here. And also during this, I'm going to grab the coordinating brush for this color. And I'm just going to fan out the edges here, so that when I go in with the next color, it's not as harsh and it'll just help with blending. The key to this backdrop is to blend very well. You want it to be a really nice, smooth ombre. And then while I'm not using the brush, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in a little plastic bag so that it doesn't dry out. The next color in this is the Passion Fruit Punch. So I'm gonna repeat the next third and blend along the way. And again, this is gonna be the next third. You can overlap a little bit. And actually, if you're a little bit more generous here on this layer, the Joyful Orange packs a really big punch, so that one can be a little bit less than a third. But the good rule of thumb is thirds. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start to blend between the two by just brushing, dry brushing over the 2 colors. And then what I'm also gonna do, because I can see here that my brush is taking off some of the pink, so I'm gonna go and grab some more pink with that brush and mix that back in. And you can kind of work this way all the way across, working with a brush for each color. Again, you want big sweeping brush strokes, not really small textural brush strokes. And you'll also go over this next color as well with your brush to smooth it out, because the roller does tend to leave a little bit of texture. So once the Passion Fruit Punch is in, it's time to move on to Joyful Orange. And so then I'll just roll the bottom of this with Joyful Orange. This is the most transparent of the colors, so this one might actually need more than one coat. But I am gonna repeat the same steps, rolling in small sections and then blending out as much as I can, but I am gonna come back after this step to do some more blending. And then you'll notice that as you get to the floor, it's really important that you have a drop cloth down because I am rolling onto the floor. You'll wanna use your small brush to paint that bottom ½ inch or so that the roller won't get. And I'm gonna do what we've been doing and blend out this color. Get rid of all of the roller texture. You'll see it the most on this color. And then I'll blend it into the passion fruit punch. Right now, this might look a little bit rough, but trust the process. It will turn into a beautiful sky. Now that your backdrop is painted and the top 2 layers have been blended, it's time to move on to the bottom section. But before you start that blending, it's time to add some spackle treatment. So the purpose of the spackle is to add a little bit more texture at the bottom of your window. This is gonna help to build the narrative of this all being hand painted. And the goal here is to make it feel like really big globs of paint. So to get started, first I'm gonna map out where my sun is. So I'm gonna take a little bit of the Cotton Blossom paint. Tilly really wants to help today. Girl, I promise you, you don't want. So I'm just gonna take a tiny bit of paint. And then I think my sun is gonna be a bit left justified in the window, somewhere around here. This will all get painted over later, so don't really worry about what this looks like. But this will be a rough area where the sun is. The purpose of doing this is that the spackle for the sun is gonna come later. It'll actually be the last thing you apply here in the paint treatment for the backdrop. So we just wanna keep that in mind. I don't wanna add any giant globs of spackle over top of it. And so with that done, I'm just gonna go ahead and start adding some globs of spackle here. And more texture the better, so that it really does look like some giant brush strokes. You can add a little bit up higher.
Because of how thick the spackle is, be sure to leave it to dry for a minimum of 4 hours. If possible, leave it to dry overnight.
So now that all of your spackle's dry, it's time to blend the passion fruit punch and the joyful orange. To do so, you'll need those 2 paints, as seen here, a spray bottle, and then a paintbrush for each of the 2 colors. Let's get started. So to blend the 2 colors, what you're going to do is add patches of both colors and then use your brushes to literally paint into one another. And so I'm gonna add a little bit of the passion fruit punch, carry it down into the joyful orange, as you see here. And then I'm gonna go back in with my joyful orange brush and then carry that up into the passion fruit punch. And I'm gonna just repeat that over and over until I make my way all the way across the backdrop. You wanna make sure that all of your brush strokes are moving in the same direction, and that should be horizontally across. You want them to be long brush strokes, nice and even. You want this to be as smooth as possible of a transition between the 2 colors. Another tool that you'll have then as well as a spray bottle, and you can use this too if you're noticing that any of the color anywhere is too thick. It'll help to thin it out. It'll make it a little bit easier to blend. So for the spackle, you're going to treat it almost like it isn't there. If there are moments where it's falling between the two colors. You'll just blend them right on top of there. The purpose of this is to add texture and to make it look like some of your paint is still on here and wet, like some really thick paint. We want this to just emphasize the fact that this thing was hand painted. You also want to make sure that you blend between the two panels. So make sure that whatever you're doing here color-wise is also following through onto the other panel. I'm just going to keep going back and forth between my two colors. Make sure that you're completely covering the spackle. You don't want any white spots to be showing. Now that you're done blending, it's time to cover any of the remaining spackle with some orange paint. Now that all of your paint is dry, it's time to add your sunrise and the sun. And so to do that, we're going to use a mixture of your cotton blossom paint and the joyful orange. And it's going to start in the area where your sun will be and emanate out from that area. So we want most of the paint to happen here in this area, and it'll trickle out onto your other backdrop panels. So to mix the highlight color that goes around the sun, you're going to be using two colors. It's the cotton blossom and joyful orange, and it's going to be a 3-to-1 ratio. And so I'm going to go ahead and pour 12 ounces of cotton blossom. And if you're using a container like this, 12 ounces would be halfway between the 8-ounce mark and the 16-ounce mark. It's not actually labeled. And now I'll be pouring 4 ounces of the joyful orange. And so that will bring me up to about 16 ounces of paint in total. Okay, and then you'll stir it until it's evenly mixed. And it'll look something like this. So to get started, you'll take a little bit of the paint that you have mixed in here, just a very little bit, and we'll just start to brush over the area where your sun will be. And then if this is looking streaky, which this is, I'm gonna use some water and blend that out. I'm also keeping my joyful orange paint nearby so that I can add that back in if it starts to go too light. And so like before, we want even strokes. We also want everything to be horizontal in direction, no swirling or vertical brush strokes. And like before, I'm gonna go and blend right over top of the spackle. As always, making sure that none of the paint is dripping. And this will just be a balance of adding light, adding back in some of the dark. I've also gone a little heavy in this area with the lighter color, and so I'm going to come back in with some orange, joyful orange. As we get further out in the composition, further away from the sun, we want the area that's painted with this highlight to be nice and wispy and thin. So almost like the last step where we were blending between two colors, I'm going to treat it a little bit like that. Another important thing here too is to step back and take a look at your work overall as you go. to make sure that the composition is looking nice, to make sure it's looking balanced. You're not too light in some areas or too dark in others.
Continue blending out the highlight from the sun. As you get further and further away, make sure that this area tapers out.
Okay, so now that I've gone in and added this halo that lives around the sun, we're gonna go back in with the cotton blossom paint and add in the sun. So again, that's gonna be in this area. I'm gonna go in with just this paint and just start to paint a rough circle. The circle itself should be about 10 inches or so in diameter, 10 inches to a foot, and not much bigger than that. At this stage, if this starts to get too heavy, you can go back in with your pre-mix, the last color from the glow, and soften it. This is almost a dry brush. I have barely any paint on here. And as always, use the spray bottle. Helps to spread it out as well. The last step is to add some spackle to your sun. And so you're gonna go ahead and take your 3-inch spackle knife and just go ahead and put some spackle on there. Unlike all of the other marks that we've made on the wall, this one we want it to feel circular, and so any marks that we make on here are gonna be in a circle. Just gonna get a little bit on here to start. And then kind of round it all out. Embrace the texture. And like the paint before, you do want this to emanate out a little bit. And so adding some onto the edges of the spackle knife and then continuing around in that circular motion.